They stole my family's farm, so I took down their entire company. A greedy corporation bulldozed my land, built a warehouse without permission, and thought I was too small to fight back. But they didn't expect me to uncover their corruption, rally the entire town, and expose their illegal land grabs. Now their warehouse is rubble, their reputation is ruined, and I still own every acre of my family's farm. George Parker turned onto the familiar dirt driveway of his family farm, his old Chevy kicking up a thick cloud of dust as he made his way home. The late afternoon sun painted the rolling fields in gold, the kind of sight that had always made him feel at peace. But today, something felt wrong. The farm had a rhythm, a familiar hum, corn stalks rustling in the breeze, distant cattle lowing, the occasional chirp of a bird. But beneath it all was something new. A low, mechanical thrum filled the air, too steady, too unnatural. Frowning, George killed the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. He'd lived on this land his entire life. His grandfather had bought it after the war, turning dry, barren soil into a thriving farm that had fed the Parker family and half the county. His father had expanded it, bringing in modern irrigation, better equipment, making sure the farm survived. And now it was George's turn. He'd done everything he could to keep it running, to keep their legacy alive. He adjusted his hat, squinting toward the horizon. That's when he saw it. At the far end of his property, standing where his western fields used to be, was something that didn't belong. Something massive. George's stomach twisted. That sure as hell wasn't there a month ago. At first, he thought maybe it was some kind of mirage, a trick of the setting sun. Maybe a neighbor had built something, and it just looked closer than it really was. But no, the longer he stared, the clearer the details became. A steel structure, tall and imposing, stretching across his land like an open wound. His hands tightened into fists. No way. He climbed back into his truck, his pulse pounding as he sped toward the structure, gravel spitting out from under his tires. The closer he got, the worse it became. He could see it now, gleaming metal siding, industrial-sized fans humming along its side, heavy machinery scattered around like a battlefield. By the time he reached the edge of his property, his anger was boiling over. He yanked the door open and stepped out, his boots sinking into soil that should have been sprouting corn. Instead, the land was flattened, torn apart by tire tracks and broken irrigation lines. Months of work, months of investment gone. And in its place, a damn warehouse. George paced the perimeter, his mind racing. Who the hell built this? And more importantly, how in God's name did this happen without him knowing? That's when he saw the sign. It was propped up against a stack of unused construction materials, a large white banner with sleek corporate lettering. Eco Storage Solutions. Sustainable warehousing for a better tomorrow. Below the slogan was a cheerful green logo, a leaf cradling a cardboard box. George's blood ran cold. He had never heard of this company, but they sure as hell had heard of him. Or, at the very least, they knew about his land. A rustling sound behind him made him whirl around. A man in a navy blue uniform stood there, clipboard in hand, a company logo on his chest. Security. George stormed up to him, his voice already tight with anger. You mind telling me what the hell this is? He gestured wildly toward the warehouse. The guard barely flinched, though his grip on the clipboard tightened. Can I help you, sir? His tone was calm, but cautious. Damn right, you can. You can explain why there's a goddamn warehouse on my property. The guard's expression shifted. Not surprised, just prepared, rehearsed. This is private property, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. George let out a sharp laugh, disbelief thick in his voice. Private property? This is my land. My family's land for 3 generations. I never sold a damn thing, never signed any permits. So, no, I'm not leaving. The guard's jaw tightened. He clearly hadn't been expecting a confrontation. Sir, I don't have any information on that. I'm just hired security. If you have an issue, you'll need to take it up with the company. Oh, you bet your ass I will, George muttered, turning on his heel and heading for his truck. His hands were trembling as he grabbed his phone. His first call was to the county zoning office. He didn't know how this had happened. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. George climbed into his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His pulse pounded in his ears as he pulled out his phone and punched in the number for the county zoning office. The automated system kicked in, forcing him through a maze of menus before finally placing him on hold. The tinny sound of classical music doing nothing to calm his rising anger. His eyes never left the massive steel structure in front of him, its presence looming like an open wound on his land. After what felt like an eternity, a voice finally answered. County Zoning Office, this is Brenda. How can I assist you today? George didn't waste a second. Yeah, Brenda, maybe you can explain to me how in the hell a warehouse got built on my farm without my permission. His voice came out tight, controlled, but edged with barely restrained fury. There was a pause, followed by the hesitant clicking of a keyboard. Can I get your parcel number, sir? George ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply before rattling off the information. More typing, then another pause, longer this time. Huh, Brenda murmured, her voice shifting slightly. Huh, George snapped. What the hell does huh mean? Another pause. Sir, according to our records, that parcel is listed as vacant land. George felt his stomach drop. Vacant, he repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. That's my goddamn farm. It's been in my family for 3 generations. I pay the taxes. I have the deed. There is nothing vacant about it. Brenda hesitated. I understand, sir. It looks like there was an update in the system a few months ago, and the land was reclassified as unclaimed public property. That must have been when Eco Storage Solutions filed their permit application. George's vision blurred for a second, his breath coming short. So what you're telling me is, because of a clerical error, some corporation just waltzed in and built a damn warehouse on my farm, and no one thought to double-check. Sir, these things happen sometimes. Data entry mistakes, system updates. George slammed his palm against the steering wheel, the sharp honk of the horn cutting through the air. These things happen. That's the best you got. I'm really sorry, sir, Brenda said, her voice quiet now, like she knew just how bad this was. But if this is an error, you'll need to file a formal dispute with the county. That process can take some time. George clenched his jaw, every muscle in his body coiled tight. And in the meantime, what? I just let these bastards keep their damn warehouse sitting on my land like they own it. Another pause. Sir, I really suggest you speak with the company directly. They may be willing to negotiate. George hung up before she could finish. His hands were shaking as he set his phone down on the seat beside him. This wasn't just some mistake. This was a disaster. If the county had already marked the land as vacant, that meant Eco Storage Solutions had filed their permits legally, as far as the records showed, anyway. Which meant this fight wasn't just about right and wrong. It was going to be a legal battle. A long one. He needed proof. He threw the truck into gear and sped back toward the house, his mind racing. By the time he reached the farmhouse, he was already pulling open the drawers in his father's old desk, digging through file after file until his hands finally landed on what he was looking for. The deed. Official, signed, and indisputable proof that this land was his. Next came the tax records, every single payment, every official document, every receipt proving ownership. He spread them out across the kitchen table, his eyes scanning for anything that could help him fight this. But paperwork wasn't going to be enough. He needed witnesses. He grabbed his phone and started calling his neighbors, people who had known this farm for decades, people who could vouch for him. Within an hour, several of them had agreed to come by. When they arrived, the reaction was unanimous: shock, anger, disbelief. George, I don't understand. This land's been in your family forever. How the hell did this happen? That company must have known something was wrong. No way they just stumbled into this. They figured no one would notice until it was too late. That last sentence made something inside George twist. That was it, wasn't it? They had counted on him being too small, too insignificant to fight back. Not a chance in hell. With the help of his neighbors, he started documenting everything. Photos of the land, the destroyed crops, the tire tracks, the broken irrigation lines. He recorded videos, standing in front of the warehouse, laying out exactly what had happened. He knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. George sat at his kitchen table, his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gripping a stack of documents, his deed, tax records, photographs of the damage, everything that proved this land was his. The line rang 3 times before a chipper voice answered. Thank you for calling Eco Storage Solutions, where sustainability meets innovation. How can I assist you today? He didn't waste time. I need to speak with someone in charge. This is about your warehouse on my land. There was a brief silence, the kind that told him the receptionist hadn't been trained for a call like this. One moment, please. The hold music kicked in, a soulless corporate jingle looping over and over as George tapped his fingers impatiently against the table. When the line finally clicked, a new voice came through, smooth, practiced and oozing false politeness. This is Mark Sanderson, Head of Legal Affairs at Eco Storage Solutions. How can I help you? George gritted his teeth. You can start by explaining why your company built a warehouse on my farm without my consent. A short pause. Mr. Parker, I assure you that Eco Storage Solutions operates in full compliance with all local laws and regulations. If there's been a misunderstanding regarding property ownership, I suggest you direct your concerns to the county, as they provided the records we used to obtain our permit. George clenched his jaw. Don't give me that legal crap. I own this land. I have the deed in front of me. I pay taxes on it. And I never signed anything allowing your company to be here. So tell me, what the hell are you going to do about it? Sanderson sighed, the sound carefully measured, just enough to sound sympathetic but not enough to suggest actual concern. Mr. Parker, if you believe there's been an error, you're certainly welcome to file a complaint. However, our records indicate that the land was listed as vacant, and we acted in good faith based on that information. Good faith? George barked a humorless laugh. You bulldozed my crops, wrecked my irrigation system, and threw up a damn warehouse in the middle of my farm without so much as a phone call. You expect me to believe you didn't realize there was a problem? Sanderson remained cool. We followed the legal process, Mr. Parker. If the county records were incorrect, that is a matter for the county to address, not us. George's grip on the phone tightened. So that's it? You're just gonna hide behind a clerical error and pretend you didn't destroy my land. As I said, Mr. Parker, if you can provide proof of ownership, we would be happy to review the situation. But I should also mention that our company has invested considerable resources into this project. Should this matter escalate, we would have to consider all legal avenues available to us. George felt his blood pressure spike. That was a threat. A careful, corporate-wrapped threat, but a threat nonetheless. He wasn't just fighting for his land now. This was about power. They were banking on him getting frustrated, backing down, accepting a settlement, or giving up altogether. They had lawyers, money, and influence. They expected him to be too small to fight back. But they had underestimated the wrong man. Consider whatever legal avenues you want, George said, his voice cold. Because I'll see you in court. He ended the call before Sanderson could respond. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the phone, the weight of what was coming crashing down on him. This wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. But he had no choice. He picked up his keys, grabbed the stack of documents, and headed for town. It was time to find a lawyer. George didn't waste any time. After hanging up on that smug lawyer, he drove straight to town, gripping the steering wheel like a man ready for war. The first stop was the office of Karen Patel, a property rights attorney he'd heard about from a neighbor. She had a reputation for being sharp, relentless, and the kind of lawyer who didn't back down from a fight. When he stepped into her office, she barely looked up from her desk, flipping through a legal pad. You must be George Parker, she said, scribbling something before finally meeting his gaze. I heard about your problem. George dropped his stack of documents on her desk. Then you know I need help? Karen flipped through the paperwork, nodding slowly. They built without an approved permit, she muttered. That's already a problem for them. And if we can prove they were aware of the ownership issue before construction, they're in even bigger trouble. They're trying to hide behind a clerical error, George said, fists clenched. Like that erases what they did. Karen smirked. Corporate lawyers always think they're the smartest people in the room. Let's remind them they're not. Within an hour, she had a cease and desist letter drafted, ordering Eco Storage Solutions to halt all operations immediately and demanding full restoration of the land. But she warned George that legal action alone wouldn't be enough. Companies like this? They expect lawsuits. What they don't expect is public pressure. That's when George knew what he had to do. By the time he got back to his farm, he had a plan, and his neighbors were going to be a part of it. He started with the farmers, the people who had known his family for generations. They were already furious when they heard about what had happened, but when George explained that this could set a precedent, that if Eco Storage could get away with this, what stopped them from taking land from others? They were all in. Next were the local businesses, the feed stores, hardware shops, and diners that had supplied the Parker farm for years. They didn't want some faceless corporation stomping all over their town, either. Then came the younger crowd, people who knew how to make noise. George's niece, Emily, helped him set up a Facebook page called Justice for Parker Farm, posting photos of the destroyed fields, the warehouse standing where his crops should have been, and the legal documents proving the land was his. Within a day, it had hundreds of shares. Within a week, thousands of people were following the story. That's when the protests started. It wasn't some wild, out-of-control scene, but it sure as hell got people's attention. Farmers and townsfolk gathered outside the warehouse, holding signs that read Parker Farm, not corporate land, and to stop the land grab. The local news station showed up, cameras rolling as George stood in front of the crowd, laying out exactly what had happened. "This isn't just about my farm," he told the reporter. "This is about standing up to corporations that think they can push us around, bury us in legal fees, and take whatever they want. Well, they're gonna find out real quick. We don't scare easy." Eco Storage Solutions stayed quiet at first, likely hoping the story would die down. But it didn't. People started digging into their past, and what they found wasn't pretty. It turned out this wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. In another town, they had tried to pressure an elderly farmer into selling his land, first offering him a fraction of its value, then tying him up in legal red tape when he refused. In another case, they built a warehouse on land that belonged to a Native American reservation, claiming it was an honest mistake, but the lawsuit that followed said otherwise. George and Karen compiled every bit of dirt they could find. The more they uncovered, the more public outrage grew. Now it wasn't just about one farm in one town. People all over were calling out Eco Storage for their shady tactics. And finally, Eco Storage broke their silence. A corporate spokesperson released a statement saying they were committed to resolving the situation and were in active discussions with Mr. Parker to find a fair resolution. George snorted when he read it. "Active discussions? They haven't called me once." Karen just grinned. "That means we're winning." But George knew the fight wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. George sat in the courthouse hallway, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor. The weight of what was about to happen settled heavy on his shoulders. The legal battle had been brewing for weeks, but now it was real. His farm, his family's legacy, his entire way of life was on trial. Karen Patel sat beside him, cool and composed as ever, flipping through a thick folder of documents. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded, though his stomach was twisted in knots. "I've been ready since the day they built that damn warehouse." The courtroom doors swung open, and George followed Karen inside. The room was packed. His neighbors, local business owners, reporters, and even a few people from out of town who had followed the case online. Across the room, the Eco Storage Solutions legal team sat at their table, looking as polished and arrogant as ever. Mark Sanderson, the smug corporate lawyer George had spoken to on the phone, was front and center, adjusting his cufflinks like he had already won. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with piercing eyes, entered and took her seat. Court is now in session. The opening arguments set the tone for what was to come. Karen stood, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the judge. "Your Honor, this case is about more than a clerical error. It is about corporate greed, about a company that saw an opportunity to seize land, bulldoze a farm, and hope that no one would notice. But my client noticed. And today, we will prove that Eco Storage Solutions knew what they were doing, ignored the law, and violated Mr. Parker's rights." Then Sanderson stood, smooth as ever. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Parker's frustration, the reality is that this entire situation arose from a mistake outside of our client's control. Eco Storage Solutions followed the legal process, relying on county records that falsely listed the property as vacant. They had no intention of causing harm, and in fact, Mr. Parker's refusal to engage in negotiations has only prolonged this matter." George nearly laughed out loud. Refusal to engage? He had been trying to get answers since day one. Then the real fight began. Karen laid out the irrefutable proof, the deed, tax records, photographs of the destruction, all showing that this land had belonged to George and his family for generations. But Eco Storage's legal team was prepared to fight dirty. They introduced their corporate counterclaim, arguing that George was being unreasonable and hostile toward a company that had been willing to negotiate a peaceful solution. They even tried to argue that the land was better suited for commercial use and that George's farm was an inefficient use of valuable property. Karen wasn't having it. She ripped into their argument like a wolf on a fresh kill. "So let me get this straight," she said, pacing in front of the courtroom. "Eco Storage Solutions illegally built on private property, and now they're trying to argue that the land would be better off in their hands? Is that the logic we're supposed to accept?" Sanderson smirked. "We are simply stating that this case could have been resolved amicably." "Amicably?" Karen raised an eyebrow. "Like when you threatened to consider all legal avenues available to force my client off his own farm?" George almost smiled. Sanderson's smirk faltered. But then came the turning point, the internal emails. Karen had uncovered damning communications during the discovery phase of the lawsuit, emails between Eco Storage executives and their project managers. One email in particular was devastating. A project manager had sent a message to the executive team, expressing concern about the land ownership issue and warning that they should verify the legal status before proceeding. The response from an executive? The county records listed as vacant. We proceed. If any issues arise, we'll deal with them later. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Karen let the words sink in before she spoke again. This email proves that Eco Storage Solutions knew the permit was pending. They knew the land's status wasn't clear. And instead of waiting for legal confirmation, they went ahead and built anyway. That is not acting in good faith. That is deliberate misconduct. Sanderson tried to recover, insisting it was one employee's mistake and that it didn't reflect the company's true intentions. But the damage was done. Then came the expert testimony, a soil scientist who confirmed that George's farmland had been severely damaged and could take years to recover. A local economist testified that the loss of an independent farm hurt the entire community, further driving home the real impact of Eco Storage's actions. By the time closing arguments came around, Karen had them cornered. She stepped forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. Your Honor, Eco Storage Solutions gambled with my client's property, assuming they could take what wasn't theirs and deal with the fallout later. They didn't just destroy a farm, they tried to erase a family's history, to take something that generations had built with their bare hands. If we let them get away with this, what's stopping them from doing it again? This isn't just about Mr. Parker. It's about protecting the rights of every landowner who could be next. Sanderson, for once, had nothing convincing left to say. The judge took a brief recess, and when she returned, the entire room held its breath. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at her notes, and then delivered the verdict. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Parker. Eco Storage Solutions is ordered to cease all operations, demolish the warehouse, and restore the land to its original state. Furthermore, the court finds the company's actions willfully negligent, and punitive damages will be awarded to the plaintiff. A collective cheer erupted from George's supporters. George felt his shoulders sag with relief as the weight of the battle finally lifted. He turned to Karen, who gave him a small, satisfied nod. They had won. But this wasn't just about one man winning a lawsuit. This was about every farmer, every small landowner, every person who had ever been steamrolled by corporate greed. And today, for once, the little guy won. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Parker farm when the demolition crews arrived. George stood on the edge of his property, arms crossed, watching his workers in hard hats and reflective vests prepared to tear down the steel monstrosity that had stolen his land. The court order had come through swift and undeniable. Eco Storage Solutions had 30 days to demolish the warehouse and restore the land to its original state. And today, they were finally being forced to make things right. As the first wrecking ball slammed into the metal siding, a deep, satisfying boom echoed across the fields. George didn't smile, he just let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the last few months finally begin to lift. The town had come out to watch. Neighbors, farmers, local business owners, they stood behind him, murmuring in approval, some even clapping when the walls began to cave in. Frank, his longtime neighbor, clapped him on the back. "Damn good day, George," he said. "Damn good day." George nodded, though the exhaustion was still heavy in his bones. "Took long enough," he muttered. The corporate lawyers had dragged their feet, trying to negotiate a settlement even after the verdict, offering him money in exchange for letting them keep the warehouse. But George had shut that down immediately. "You can take your check and shove it. That land isn't for sale." He had fought for his family's legacy, and no amount of money was worth handing it over. The fight had been long, brutal, but he had won. By the time the warehouse was reduced to twisted metal and shattered concrete, George felt something shift inside him, not just relief, but closure. For months, this thing had stood on his land like an ugly reminder of what had almost been taken from him. Now, it was nothing but debris. The legal victory had come with more than just the demolition order. Eco Storage Solutions had been forced to pay hefty damages, enough to not only restore his farm, but ensure that no corporate giant would ever pull this stunt again. Their public image had taken a massive hit, especially after the media ran with the story, uncovering their pattern of land grabs across the country. Other lawsuits had already started popping up, other people coming forward with similar stories. They had tried to erase him, but instead, George had become the symbol of standing up to corporate greed. The real work, though, was just beginning. The land wasn't the same, not yet. The soil had been compacted by heavy machinery, and the irrigation system would take time to rebuild. But George wasn't alone in fixing it. His neighbors showed up, just like they always had. Farmers with tractors, local businesses donating materials, friends helping to plant new crops. Even the young folks who had helped spread his story online came out, eager to turn words into action. "Damn shame what they did to this place," Frank muttered one morning as he helped George lay new irrigation lines. "But you'll get it back. This farm's seen worse." George wiped the sweat off his forehead, nodding. "Yeah, we will." He wasn't just rebuilding a farm. He was rebuilding a legacy. One evening, after the last of the volunteers had gone home, George sat on his porch, staring out over the land. The fields were still scarred, the earth not yet healed, but he could already see the first hints of green sprouting through the soil. A soft breeze carried the familiar sounds of the farm, the rustling of cornstalks, the hum of insects, the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. The farm was alive again. He thought about his grandfather, about his father, what they had built, what they had fought for. He thought about the fight he had just endured, the sleepless nights, the anger, the exhaustion. And now, sitting here, staring at the land that had almost been stolen from him, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. The farm wasn't just land. It was his family's story, their history, their blood and sweat woven into the soil. It was a battle won, a lesson learned, a promise kept. And as long as George Parker had breath in his body, no one was ever taking it from him again.